everyone, and welcome to your last session of the day. Today, Gourav and I are really excited to dive into one of our favorite topics. So we're going to talk about cloud unit economics. We're thrilled to have this platform to share our journey into this dynamic space with all of you. Before we get started, we want to do a quick intro so that you get to know a little bit more about us, our background. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is Schminke, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Cloud Cost Optimization team at Deltek. I love leading cloud cost optimization. I love data. I've spent a lot of my career spearheading transformation initiatives that are very metrics-driven. The last few years, I've been responsible for multi-million-dollar cloud portfolios. I actually started with Deltek last year, so 2023, January of 2023, so about 18 months ago. And I was brought on to stand up the FinOps practice for Deltek. So our focus areas were cloud capacity management, cloud cost optimization, and unit economics, which is the story that we're going to share today. Prior to Deltek, I did lead the FinOps team for my previous organization. I've conducted many internal talks and training sessions, but this is the first time I've had the opportunity and have been brave enough to speak at a foundation event. I'm going to let Gourav go ahead and do an intro.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Gourav Kapoor. All right. Yeah, so I've been with Deltek since almost 5 years now. I'm Director for Cloud Architecture and FinOps. So my team essentially deals into the aspects of end-to-end product lifecycle into the cloud. We deal into a lot of ERP products for specific industries and project-based businesses. And FinOps being part of my team essentially helps it even more because architecture is very closely aligned with the FinOps here. We've been doing FinOps essentially a little bit over before FinOps was being called FinOps, and people were calling it cost management platform, cost management services, and so on. By the way, I'm based in Ottawa, Canada, so if anybody is here from Canada or Ottawa wants to have a local meetup there, I'm more than welcome to do that. Before Deltek, I've been into UKG. I had a long stint there, so love FinOps, love working in this domain, and as Kim said, this is our favorite topic, and now she'll lead into the more details.
Okay, so let's dive into the agenda. So really what we want to do today, you guys, is tell you a story. We want to tell you about our journey into unit economics. So we're going to start out and really kind of talk about the why. You know, why did we need unit economics at Deltek? What was our trigger point? What were our leaders asking us? You know, why did we invest resources in this effort? And then we're going to talk about the what. So we're going to talk about, you know, what metric did we develop in response to some of those questions from our leaders? You know, what was our, you see, superstar metric? We're going to talk about our superstar metric. You know, what are the components of the metric? What calculations do we feel are important? You know, what are the components, or how did we operationalize the process? And then I'm going to hand it over to Gourav, and he's going to talk about the how. So he's going to talk about the framework and, you know, the intersections between different teams at Deltek and their use of the metrics. And then lastly, we're going to show you guys some sample reports. We're going to talk about our challenges, because as we all know, it's not easy in this space. And we're going to talk about where we are and where we're headed. Okay, so let's start by kind of level setting, you know, what is unit economics? So for us, unit economics really translates that cloud data and metrics into terms that really make sense to the business. So, you know, knowing that you're spending $10 million on cloud, you know, that's a metric, right? But putting that in terms of, you know, a unit of measure, that's where you really see that tremendous amount of value. You know, and really what we wanted to do is we wanted to develop a metric that we could use to really kind of standardize our unit of measurement so that we could cross-compare our products and services. We wanted to, so as far as the unit economics, so the definition is on the screen, but unit economics really represents that marginal revenue and cost associated with the development and delivery of our cloud-based solutions on a per unit basis. So this is just some examples of what might be a unit metric, so whatever makes sense for your company, per user, per transaction, per product, per service, et cetera. So now I'm going to dive into, you know, what happened at Deltek and why we began this journey. You know, so as our products migrated to the cloud and our customers started adopting our cloud products, our costs really started to rapidly increase. we started to see significant growth rates in our cloud expenses, and we needed to understand, what was happening. Were those increases in expenses, were they proportional to sales? Were our products priced appropriately? And we really needed to understand that so that we could really figure out where we should focus to really try to slow down that growth rate. So you'll see several questions on the screen. So if your cloud costs are increasing, you're going to start getting a lot of questions from your leaders, right? So we had leaders in cloud, finance, and product teams start asking us questions. Questions like, how much do our products cost to produce? Can we forecast based on unit metrics? How do the costs of one product compare to the cost of another product? How do new features, impact the unit costs and the gross margins for our products? And really, is this a good investment? So we were faced with a lot of challenges, and those challenges really required us to respond. So, what did we do? When presented with this challenge, the first step typically, is really what, your company is asking you to cut cloud costs, right? But really, what we actually did at Deltek and what our leaders were asking us was to really understand what those cloud costs were, right? Why was it happening? And in my previous organization, we did a lot of reporting, forecasting, cost optimization, and that was really kind of our entry point into FinOps. But when I started at Deltek, to some degree, we kind of took this backward journey into FinOps, because we actually really very much started with unit economics. So we prioritized tagging, but then we immediately jumped right into that product pricing and unit economics space. Our leaders were not immediately asking us to cut cloud costs, but instead they were asking us why. And we needed to be able to answer those questions and provide clarity on our product costs and margins.
So I want to just reiterate on this particular step here, right? So Kim mentioned that we started our journey backwards. That was very critical for us, right? When we started that trigger, which Kim just shared, we started looking at our cloud costs were increasing rapidly. Usually the first action is go and start optimizing the cost, right? And that was our thought process as well. It was like, let's just go jump in, right? And then we started analyzing, is it going to help us in the longer term? Is it going to scale us, right? That's why those leadership questions came in. And then we sat down and we took a step back and we said, okay, let's first try to understand, where are we paying? What product is consuming more? Where can we make more money? Where can we optimize, right? So that's why we took that first step. We said, let's get into the unit economics first, and then we will certainly take a parallel step or a next step essentially to optimize those as we start finding or getting the understanding of the cloud. So it's very important for us to have that understanding.
Okay, so next I want to kind of continue our story and talk about our kind of what we call our team players. So these are our personas at Deltek. So some of these align with some of the material in the FinOps Foundation, but a lot of these are very specific to the roles that were played within our organization. So I'm going to start with the FinOps team. I lead the FinOps team, right? And our responsibility is really to collaborate with the teams, to capture all of those requirements, and then to actually create the algorithms and automate and publish the unit metrics. So, when you look at unit metrics, it's kind of like we do the work and we publish the metrics in collaboration with all these other teams, right? And then other teams are leveraging the metrics that we're producing. So, our finance teams are leveraging those unit metrics to do their forecasting. Our pricing team is ingesting those metrics into the pricing model and using those in their pricing decisions. And then with vendor management, there's been a lot of talk about third-party vendor management. It's really interesting when you're looking at the pricing of vendor solutions on a per unit basis, right? And so that also adds a tremendous amount of value. This is just a quick look at our goals, right? So, a lot of these align with some of the material that I know you guys have seen on the foundation site. But, we really wanted to, build and maintain our unit metrics for all of our products and offerings to really, enable that informed decision making. We wanted to calculate those spend rates and also use those, right, to cross-compare our products. And then we wanted to, be able to better forecast. And then ultimately identify, the opportunities for optimization. I love this slide. This is from the foundation, but I really think that this is a nice slide that really illustrates where unit economics fits in with those other FinOps capabilities. So you can see that it's right at the core. It's at that intersection. And again, really what it does is it's going to add that value to all of those other capabilities. It's that value realization. Because now I kind of talked about what unit economics is and why we needed it. So now we're going to talk about what we did. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our superstar metric.
Let's look at that.
All right, so our superstar metric is what we call PEPI at Deltek. And if you talk to our leaders in our cloud product and finance teams, they all know what PEPI is. We've gotten to the point where that is kind of common language across all of our different groups. So our PEPI metric is the cost to deliver our cloud products per employee per year. Now, because we are a SaaS company, we sell our products, using a subscription-based model. And so this unit metric really made sense for us. It's an easy conversation, to have with pricing and sales when you've translated all of those costs into a cost per user per year, right? So since we sell our products on a subscription-based model, we can also look at the revenue, and so we're able to actually calculate those margins.
So funny story. Originally, the name of this metric was per user per year, but then we started sounding it sounded like puppy. So we then tweaked it to said per employee per year. We said that probably makes much more sense to sound it with the whole organization.
All right. So cloud infrastructure costs are important, but for our company, we wanted to include all the costs that are incurred to produce our product. So due to this, you can see our calculation here. We're taking cloud costs plus licensing costs plus labor costs plus shared services costs, and then we're dividing that by the number of user licenses. This slide's going to take you on a bit more of a dive on those building blocks for our PEPI calculation. So when I say cloud costs, I'm looking at costs, your cloud billing costs, AWS costs, Oracle, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure. Licensing costs are going to be those third-party costs, right? Things like the cost of ServiceNow, Splunk, OS and database licensing costs. Labor costs, that's your resource cost. So it's the cost of those SRE teams, solutions architects, my team, customer care. And then the shared services infrastructure, that's that shared infrastructure that we're leveraging a lot of times to host those third-party products. And then the user licenses, again, is that denominator. I'm not going to read this slide to you, but I do think that this is a nice representation of all of the components that we use in the calculation. And really what I want to highlight here are some of the prerequisites that we needed to do in order to get us to this point. So with our cloud costs, you hear a lot about tagging. You have to have tagging. You have to have proper business mappings for your data. Your licensing and your shared services costs, again, you need to understand the agreements for your third-party licenses. You need to know the calculations, and you need to know what products are using what third-party licenses, right? Labor costs, you're going to need to be able to map your labor to your products. You can do that in a timekeeping system if you're advanced, or you can use a labor allocation file. Yeah. And then, your user count. This was a big debate on what's our denominator. So we decided to use number of users sold per year. We talked about number of users implemented per year. Those are not necessarily the same in all organizations. So really think about that denominator, talk it through, and make sure that you choose the right metric for your company. This is a look at our calculation model. So on the left, you can kind of see the input data sources that are coming in. We've got those public cloud costs with all that tagging, the third-party vendor costs, our licensing costs, our licensing calculation, all those rules that we wrote that we integrated into our algorithms, our CMDB data, and of course the number of users. So those all flow into the calculation model. And what I want to highlight on the right side of the screen is we talked about the PEPI and kind of adding all those components, but the other piece of this is actually making sure that for every product, we actually generate a PEPI for our public cloud costs, a PEPI for our shared services costs, a PEPI for our licensing cost, and a PEPI for our labor cost, right? What that does is it really helps us to see that entire picture of where we're spending in the cloud and in the areas of focus, right? The PEPI may be $10 for a given product, right? Is $7 of it labor or is $7 of it cloud, right? Really just making sure that you have all of that information readily available. This is a quick look at our monthly process. So on the 10th of the month, all of our data sources and our financial systems are finalized. And so at that point in time, we have a model that executes and it runs and it populates that data into a staging environment. What we do next is our validation step. So we pause. We do not publish data directly to production. Instead, we actually take time to validate it. It usually takes about a day or so, honestly, and we're getting faster and faster at it. But what we're looking for is those cost anomalies. We want to make sure it's high quality data. We do not want to publish data that has any kind of an error in it, or maybe there was something in a sales system that needed to be updated for a new contract or something like that. So we do validate that data, and then we publish that data into production. Okay, so now I've kind of covered, why we did it, what we did, our superstar metric. I'm going to hand it over to Gourav to really take you through the framework and how we scaled the process. So really focusing on that how piece.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. So since we now understand why we needed that, because of the trigger of the cloud cost, what we needed to determine, which was our unit metric we found, the challenge was how do we make it scalable then? What was our framework going to look like? So that's what we're going to deep dive into this next. So I'm going to take a step back here and revisit these building blocks, because this is the core of the whole process here, right? These are the building blocks. If we know these building blocks really well, deep into each of these, what metrics we want to capture from each of these blocks, then essentially we can come up with a scalable framework here, right? So as Kim touched on some of those, we have cloud costs coming in, we have licensing costs coming in. It's very important for us to understand operating system licenses is different than database licenses, than the third-party vendors we are using across the board. They charge completely different on different models, labor cost, and then the shared services cost, obviously with our denominator user licenses here. So we're going to look at each of these now. So these are the sources, right? So if we look at this, right, the sources here, as I mentioned, some of the building blocks here, right? So we have cloud providers here based on tagging, some of the prerequisites Kim mentioned here, right? So if we make sure that we have tagging across different cloud providers, different product lines, different services we use, and then that is one of our major source. Then we have software asset management, in which we use with collaboration with our vendor management team, we put in all of our contracts, like ServiceNow contracts, Qualys, CrowdStrike, whatever services we use, third-party services we use. We have this integration right now with our software asset management system. We pull in that information on a monthly basis, and then we figure out how to allocate that to different products, right? Because that's a common cost being used by 10 different products. ServiceNow being used by 10 different products, there's no easy way to know which product does ServiceNow use more or less, right? And then we have finance tools, which essentially gives us the labor cost. Labor cost is again based on allocation strategy. It's a different allocation strategy because now we have some set of people in cloud who are dedicated to a product line. Application release teams, they are dedicated to a product line. But then there's an SRE team that is responsible for looking at 10 products and solve their alerts, right? They're not dedicated to a product. So we use a certain methodology to take that set of people and come up with the allocation, that how much of the time or the effort they spend on each product, and we take that percentage, work with our finance systems, and allocate that cost across to different products, right? So that's a process which we review quarterly with the finance and the teams and make sure the allocation exists, which is essentially right. And then we have CRM, which is essentially the Salesforce system we use, which gives us the ability to understand how many users or employees we have sold for each of our product, right? So our product gets sold by the number of user licenses or employees licenses, AKA, right? So that system gives us the ability to know, okay, these many sources or these many users have been sold for each product, so that becomes my another source of system. Now you can see the personas on the top of it. These are the personas who essentially contribute or essentially directly or indirectly work with that. Then we take those information, right? Now, what are the metrics we capture? Then these are the metrics we capture from each of those sources. If you look at AWS, we look at the infrastructure cost, right? That EC2, EBS, networking, containers, all of this information is coming from these cloud providers. All four different cloud providers we use, and apparently we do use all of the four cloud providers in the picture here, right? And then we also take shared services costs. And that's a challenge, right? NAT gateway is shared across 5 different products, right? Or load balancer is shared across different products. There's no easy way to essentially for us to figure out what product it is tied to. Again, we use some sort of allocation methodology, which is based on the weighted spend, that depending upon how much each product is spending, we allocate the shared services cost higher to that product, right? And then we essentially, as I said, like third-party licensing costs, which we covered, coming through the software asset management system. Labor costs comes through that, which is, again, tied to the product. And then the users, which are essentially subscribed, or the people who are subscribed to our product. All of this information that gets ingested into Apptio. So we use Apptio Cloudability, right, and Apptio TBM Studio, right? So we take that information. Cloudability essentially pulls all this information from these cloud providers. TBM Studio, we have built integrations with our finance tools, with ServiceNow, with Salesforce, right? We get all these metrics, as I just mentioned, third-party systems, licensing, users. All of that information gets into TBM Studio and Apptio. Now, this is where all the magic happens, right? We got all the costs at one place. Now we can define whatever rules, whatever allocation strategies we want to define. And that's where we go by product. We define the allocation strategy. By teams, we define the cost allocation for labor, and then we come up with the PEPI calculation. And that's the same formula which Kim just mentioned. We take all of this costs, cloud costs plus licensing plus shared services plus third-party vendors, divided by the number of users for each product, and we get PEPI, right? So.
Yeah, so really, if you remember, earlier when we were talking about, that $10 million, right, in cloud costs, we're ingesting all of that data, we're doing all of those mappings, we're dividing all of that out by the number of users sold, we're generating that PEPI metric, and then we're taking that PEPI metric, and we're going to move that through the rest of the process, into our finance teams and into our pricing teams.
Yes. So now the question becomes, we got PEPI. What are we going to do with this? So we reached to at that stage, actually, right? So we said, OK, we now know that if we have to sell this product for 10,000 users, each user costs us this much, right? But what are we going to do with it? How do we build the further integrations into the other functional groups in the organization? So we took a step forward here, right? So we said, OK, let's share that information with our pricing teams. Because they are the people who are essentially need to know what is the cost to produce, right? And then how can they build more margins or whatever margins they need to build upon so that they can sell it, right? Essentially give it to the sales organization to sell it. So that's what happened, right? So we brought our finance team and pricing teams into Apptio, gave them the full visibility. We have dashboards for each product, each service. They have the ability to see it, and that happens monthly, as Kim mentioned, the monthly operation process. So we can see if the cost to produce is increasing by month over month for certain products, and it does happen. Sometimes you're doing releases and upgrades, and you have additional cost, right, which is not initially included in the pricing of the product, right? And the pricing team now has the ability, so they add their whatever margins they need to add, right? So that's essentially their line of business, so we don't essentially get into that. But that's where the pricing persona comes into picture. Pricing then takes this information, and then based on the information we produce, right? So we said we have a PEPI, which is cost to produce. We have now added the margins. Now we know what is the price we need to sell it into the market, right? So that gets added into essentially our price books or CRM systems or whatever the other systems are for each product, even for each add-on or whatever add-on services we sell. So that's how deep essentially we have gone with the PEPI essentially into this. Now we reached there, and then we had another question. OK, now we know how to sell or what is the price to sell essentially, but how does it help us in doing forecasting or budgeting, right? So we said, OK, let's take it to another step here. So as I said, this is for each product offering. Then we build this process, right? What we said is, OK, now we have all this data at one place, which as I mentioned in Apptio and TBM Studio. We know our cost per product offering. We know cost by each component of PEPI, as Kim mentioned, how much shared services cost us, how much third-party cost us for each product, how much labor cost us for each product. Right? Based on that information, we started ingesting that information or giving that information to finance processes now. Right? So we said, OK, we do a periodic sync with our, I would say, Salesforce data or quarterly data, which is the users, because that's tied to revenue. Right? So we do how much of the users we are hoping to sell in next 1 year or 2 years, and that essentially gives us a picture of the revenue. Right? And then based on the data we have all the cost data for last 1 year or 2 years, right? How we have grown, what is our capacity need, right? We tied both of that together, and that gives us our forecasting needs, right? Now comes the profitability aspect of it, right? Because we ingest revenue information from our finance systems, we have cost to produce, we have simple visibility to essentially get our gross margins, right? That tells us how much profit are we making by each product offering. Now, in the next phases of what we are doing, we are even rolling it out at a customer level, right? We're going even deeper. We're saying, okay, I have 10,000 customers who use this X product, right? Am I making margins on each of these products, right? Or what happens when a renewal comes and stuff like that, right? So we have that visibility now. We're into the process of doing that, where we are going at the product, each customer level, because we have information of revenue, and we have information of how much does it cost to run this product for that particular customer. So that gives us great visibility into this whole process, right? So that covers the whole framework, right, which starts essentially with our sources and ends at essentially making sure that we have a profitability picture and making sure we have the ability to do budget and forecasting based on the data we have here. So this is the whole framework. Now, I mentioned a couple of times allocation strategy, right? So we have intentionally mentioned here vCPU because that was the original strategy we were using for allocating our spend, right? Because of the shared services, we didn't know which product is using what shared services or how should we allocate. We initially started looking at vCPU as a metric, and we started allocating cost based on that. But then we found that as we were moving to ECS or containers or some of the services which are not necessarily tied to a CPU as a metric, it was becoming another problem for us to figure that out, right? How to allocate that cost, and we were randomly just allocating that cost. So then we changed our model to a weighted cloud spend. So what we simply said is if my shared services cost is $1 million cost, and I have 10 products, I just figure out which one of these products has the higher cost, and based on that, we simply allocate that 1 million of shared services cost to each of these products, right? So the bigger the product cloud spend is, the bigger the share of the shared services they are consuming, right? And that's, again, that may not be true in all scenarios, but that's what we found consistent with our data. I mean, if we are using Splunk as a shared services, the bigger the cloud spend on that product is, that's producing more and more logs for Splunk, essentially, right? So that's why we take the Splunk cost, which is a shared cost, and allocate that to a bigger product here. Now, I'm going to go through some of the sample reports, which essentially demonstrates how this PEPI data essentially has helped us, right? And we'll essentially understand a little bit more information. Now, these are not the real products, but these numbers are very much real in terms of how they look like for our real products. These are made-up products. So we have similar offerings for our products, right? So I mentioned a couple of products here, Biz Pro, Biz Data. We have enterprise offering and standard offering, right? So we have this level of visibility and this level of dashboards created in Apptio, right? What it's telling me is that I have a public cloud spend, for example, for Biz Pro, which is $130 and $121 for standard, and I have a labor spend or shared services spend essentially for $40-some dollars here, right? What we found interesting is that if we look at Biz Data as an example here, right, we found the enterprise version of that is around $36 for the labor cost, right? And we found the standard offering, which is supposed to be cheaper, which is supposed to be bringing less revenue because it's a cheaper offering, right, is actually equal in terms of the labor cost, which is costing us, right? So that level of visibility opened our eyes. It was like, why are we spending same level of labor cost on an enterprise level product as well as a standard level product, right? And we started digging into that, and then we found, oh my God, that the standard level product was never essentially prioritized in a way or invested in a way to have the automation. So we had more and more people thrown at that product to do all the upgrades and releases and manage that product. Whereas enterprise was always prioritized and managed effectively, we found that we have similar labor costs, right? So what action it gave us is like, okay, now we figured out where do we need to invest, right, essentially to save that labor cost from a standard product, right, and use those dollars somewhere else by investing and prioritizing that in terms of automation, right? That could be another, and some similar example. Another example we have here is a Biz Secure. So if you found we have a third-party vendor cost, which is higher than a public cloud cost, right? So for the standard product, right? So what we found is that I'm spending some $36 per user, and this is again PEPI, we're sticking to the same methodology, cost per user or per employee per year, right? I'm spending $36 per user per year on a third-party vendor solution, which is actually more than I spent to run this product in the public cloud. Now, we started investigating into that, and we found we have some integrations built into our product, which was acquired, or which was purchased a few years ago, and we found that product was never either negotiated, or there are much more alternatives in the market. There are many ways to do that thing for which we're using this third-party product, right? And again, this visibility, that's why the PEPI at each component helped us understanding where do we need to optimize it, right? And this opened up the whole scale for us. That's why when we said in the step one, we took is understanding this whole cost. And then we went into the optimization route, right? So, and this is just some of the examples of how licensing cost is, right? We started looking at our licensing contracts that, are we paying more to Microsoft or paying more to Oracle? Are we paying more to any third-party vendors licensing cost, right? So that also gave us visibility. And then we started setting up targets for ourselves, okay, right? Okay, we need to optimize these costs, right, by either renegotiating contracts, by either looking at the alternatives, right? Can we move to Linux from Windows, right? I mean, having long-term strategies. So it opened up a lot of conversation within engineering organization, within our product organization, because before that, we never had this visibility, essentially, to understand some of these components. So this is another sample report, which essentially just tells the cost for each product here. For enterprise, for example, is $180, and standard is $121. Now, this is not the cost for a user to go and to be sold in the market. This is the cost to produce for us, right? And then sales, as I mentioned in the framework slide, pricing will take it, add margins on top of it, and essentially will say, okay, let's run it in the sales organization or whatever they need to do. All right, so we talked about the framework. Now we know what we did, why we did, and how we did it. It seemed like very easy, right? We have the same feeling when we showed it. Oh, was it that easy, right? So it wasn't easy at all, right? Let's be very honest. It wasn't easy at all, but it was fun. It was too much fun. It provided us a lot of data insights which we never knew about our products. We never knew about our product offerings. We didn't know about our add-ons. We didn't know where we were spending money. We just knew that we had a $40 million or $50 million cloud bill. That's all was a metric we had, right? So we found certain challenges around data accuracy, right? Again, as Kim mentioned, the validation process. That is very important, right? So we do that. Data will never be perfect, right? We look at our cost allocation challenges, allocation strategy. As I said, we pivoted from one vCPU strategy to a weighted cloud spend strategy. We had a different strategy for labor allocation in the beginning. Then we found it's not going to scale. It's too complex. We pivoted again to a different labor allocation strategy, right? So you always have to adapt and pivot a little bit more in there. And then adoption barriers. I think you all probably who are involved in embracing FinOps or cultivating that culture in your organization, you can see how hard it is to essentially go to some of those folks and tell them, okay, we're talking about cost optimization. The first reaction you get is like raising an eyebrow. What? Like, why the hell are we talking about this, right? So those were some of the challenges, and the road was difficult, but it was fun, as I said.
A little bumpy.
Yeah.
But ultimately, kind of zeroing in a little bit more on that data accuracy, that is critically important, right? You have to build trust in your data. So, again, thinking back to that operational process, that's why we don't just snap our fingers, execute it, publish it to production for our leaders. We take that time, we pause, and we validate, because we really want to mitigate that risk to make sure that we have that accurate data.
Yeah. All right, so this is the roadmap, right? And again, as it shows here, how we started, right? We actually started way before than that, but I think this is how much we could fit on the slide here. So we're talking pretty much here the summer 2022, right? We came up with this strategy and this methodology and this framework, right? And we realized we didn't have all tools. We didn't have Apptio. We didn't have cloudability. We didn't have proper tagging everywhere. We didn't have any integration with our software asset management or Salesforce, or none of that existed. But we knew what our framework should look like, right? We knew what we needed to do, right? So we said, okay, let's start it, right? Let's start manual. Doesn't matter. It will be repeatable. But as far as it's a repeatable method, which can be eventually implemented in an automated and scalable fashion, we took that journey and we started that, right? And then we slowly, gradually started improving upon that, right? And within I would say, a few months, as we got a couple of, we built a lot of this stuff in Excel with macros, and we have a couple of great team members who love Excel, and they're awesome at it, right? So we built all of this in Excel first, right? All of these graphs we're talking, this PEPI level details in Excel, right? And then when we started understanding the value and the importance of this data and the value it brings to the organization, it brings in engineering decisions, it brings in product decisions, it brings in margin decisions. At that time, we decided, okay, now, we really need to make this a little bit more scalable and public within the organization, right? And that cannot be done in Excel without having probably 15 people thrown at it, right? So at that time, we started looking for certain tools, and we started adopting different technologies and started building integrations as well, right? It shows where we are right now. Our product offerings are automated. We can actually see the cost strategy or cost for each product offering, as I said, PEPI at each component level. That tells us whether we need to optimize licensing or cloud cost, or are we throwing way more people than needed at this product, or is it even worth that, right? Drives our investment and innovation strategies also, right? Finance teams, leadership teams, and product teams, they all have access to these systems, right? So pricing teams can get to this. They can see their cost by their product, right? Where are they spending? Are they throwing more money on IOPS or EC2 instances? As I mentioned vaguely, that we are now moving into customer specific, right? Now we have done more than, I don't know how many customers we have, like huge customers we have, right? Now we want to go at a customer level. We're trying to understand and add-ons, right? We have a lot of add-ons and value-added services, right? Some of the add-ons, we want to understand, are we really making money, or we just, mix it with the main offering and we're not even making any money on it, right? So the goal is essentially, as I said, is not to optimize it yet. Goal is still to get into more visibility, more transparency here, right? And that's what we hope by the end of this year. We have a great team who essentially are experts in this and love this FinOps domain. So that's essentially our goal, is essentially by the end of this year. So with that, I guess that's for our last slide. So we have some time for Q&A now.
Got a few.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
Great talk, thanks. Any questions? Oh, wow. That was quick. No, yeah.
I keep it a long time.
What time is it?
We have 8 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So you calculate all your costs by OpEx, or you capitalize your cost of the cloud?
That's a wonderful question. So just to repeat, the question is, do we calculate our cost all by OpEx, or do we also calculate the cost by CapEx, right? So, you mind to take it?
No, you can
Okay.
take that one, that's fine.
Yeah, so majority of our cost,
orders.
is OpEx, right? There are only very small portions, for example, software licensing components, Microsoft licenses or Oracle licenses, where there is a CapEx portion. But majority of our portion is just the OpEx cost. So all of the components we talked about is all OpEx. Now what we do is we have a strategy. It's actually, we're not doing it today, but we are working on a strategy being developed. We're taking the CapEx cost and trying to understand how long we should be allocating it for, 7 years, 10 years, and divide that component and see if it needs to be adjusted into our actual model. Now, the reason we don't do it today is because of many financial reasons. It's not just that we cannot do it. I mean, the way we do the budgeting, the way you do your annual reports and stuff like that. So we have not reached to that point where we take our CapEx cost. We know our CapEx cost is being tracked, but we do not necessarily allocate that to any of our products yet, because the portion is very, very small in our financial terms.
Okay, so you said that you would like to have accuracy for trust. So what inaccuracy of data you found, and how you overcome it?
I think the question is what
Data
inaccuracies
accuracy.
we found and how did we overcome it. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can take that. I mean, as you're going through data, you're going to find issues. It's a lot of data, right? It's a lot of data. Some challenges that we had with, initially with some of our business mappings, right? Some of our tagging and some of the tagging not going quite, to the correct product. We had a couple of issues in our sales systems with, just some of the contract renewals not necessarily being updated timely, right? So that affects the denominator. But again, really our goal is to really validate that data to the best of our ability, but also understanding that the data it's never going to be 100% perfect,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Got a question over here.
Hey, two questions. One is that how do you factor in the usage of a particular tool? So say, for example, you use Aptio. Maybe there are two people who use Aptio, but you create dashboards that are viewed by many people and they use it for different purposes. So while there are two licensed users, I'm making this up, so you will divide the total cost that you spent on Aptio divided by 2, but then actually your whole organization uses it. How do you factor that in Peppy? That's one question, and then I have another one.
Do you want to take that?
Sure.
Or I can.
So that's a good question, essentially. So this goes back to the component third-party vendor management, third-party cost management component, right? So Aptio is just literally very one small tool in that whole big list of third-party services we use, right? And we follow the similar model again, right? We say that this is much how Aptio cost us or XYZ vendor cost us, right? And then we allocate that based on the weighted cloud spend, as we talked about, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a cost to produce whatever the software we are producing, right? And that cost gets allocated to essentially based on the weighted cloud spend to all of the other products as well. It's essentially the similar methodology.
Okay. And is this calculation used by the product teams in prioritizing their features? So do they say, oh, this is the Peppy for this particular product, so I will probably not produce as many features in this particular area, or no?
You want me to take it?
So Gaurav works with the product team
Yes.
all the time on these questions. So
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So the question is, does the product team essentially uses this data to make feature decisions, right? Essentially, that's the question. I would say the answer is going to be the product team uses this data, definitely, but not necessarily for feature decision as such, but essentially for product strategy, right? Because we're not talking about, okay, they definitely look at Peppy every month or every, whatever the period they want to look at it. And then we figure out, okay, this product is really either expensive or not expensive. Now, indirectly, as you said, right, if the feature needs way more computational power, for example, or the feature needed a third-party integration, right? Or the feature needed, I don't know, just gonna need 75 more people to support that feature, right? So that data visibility, right, which we have generated for them, which tells them, okay, how much is your cloud cost? And we do that math with them. We work very closely with them and figure out, not for all features, that's why I said, if it's a small feature, which is essentially not impacting anything as such, right, but the product strategy. If they are trying to bring a new integration into the product, right, and they expect to buy, for example, Tableau, right, I'm just making up, right, and now they see, okay, I'm just going to integrate Tableau with this product, we're going to buy Tableau, but how does that impact the Peppy? Right? Does it really increase it by $20 or $30 per user? And is it going to hit our margins? So that discussions we do. And the reason we are able to do that is because we simply take that numbers, ingest into our third-party numbers, and we see what's the impact look like. And that gives us the ability to do that with them. But the answer is definitely yes.
Cool. Gourav, Kyun, thank you so much for your amazing presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.